So we've tackled some of the questions of how our kids' brains and their sense of the world is developing, and touched on dealing with our discomfort of racial discussions. Now it's time to talk about both embracing and celebrating diversity. Let's bring in Andrew. Andrew, we're so glad you're here tonight to talk about the topic of diversity.
Great to be with you, Michaela.
So, let's hear from some families now and their kids about how they have tried to tackle ideas and strategies to embrace and celebrate diversity. Let's take a look.
I think we could all use just more exposure to differences in our lives.
I mean, in general, I think we need more diversity all across the board.
There have been moments where I've looked up and gone, oh my goodness, everyone here looks just like me.
I never thought to myself, I need to go get another Indian friend or a black friend. But there was something a little bit more magnetic about somebody that was a little bit different too.
The neighborhood I live in is not very diverse, so I've had to make it an active part of my everyday life to seek out diversity.
People are used to living within their tribe that's similar to them. And there is a second thought you have to do to expand that.
I joined a women's collective that was for women of color and their allies.
We try to expose Jack to different cultures in kind of whatever way sort of meets him where he is.
It's not just the people, but it's also surroundings that I think kids need that help enrich their culture, their lives.
Different restaurants, different artistic shows, different festivals, just to show them the world is bigger than you.
We are such an incredible blend of so many different cultures. We try to instill that in our children, that you can be a mix of cultures.
My favorite thing about our culture is our togetherness, the way that we always are resilient.
One of the things I love most about Jewish culture is we teach a lot about gratitude. We teach a lot about perspective.
Black people just have sauce, flavor.
Dance, rock music, jazz.
I love our culture.
We kind of define our culture by just our local community.
We do everything exceptionally well in spite of all the obstacles that have come our way.
Recipes that have been passed down. My grandma's recipe for matzo ball soup.
We have Shabbat dinners now.
We're gonna have a turkey for Thanksgiving.
On the other side, my dad makes some great enchiladas.
Collard greens, macaroni and cheese.
I had 2 or 3 very close friends that were Catholic, and they've been to more bar and bat mitzvahs.
We're pretty traditional. We like fireworks for 4th of July. Mommy and Daddy are gonna have a beer.
I've been to my first Christmas parties, and that was fun and exciting, and get to see part of who they are, and I hope that for my kids.
People have different cultures, and they have certain things about them that make them unique. At the end of the day, they're still human beings, and we're very complex people. At least I am.
All right, so we're back with my friend Andrew Grant Thomas to talk about the issue of diversity. So we just saw that in this video, parents who are out there and they're doing some self-reflection on the experiences they themselves and their families are having. So Andrew, what is a sign that we may need to make more of an effort to embrace the diversity around us in meaningful ways? If you're a parent and you're thinking, let's do a kind of self-evaluation, if you will. And in doing so, I wonder if you can explain for us the concept of thick and thin relationships and why this distinction is important.
It's a great question, Michaela. So, the place I would start with that is thinking about why diversity, right? Why diversity matters to us. For me, certainly, first, there is diversity as a value in itself, right? It's an end in itself. So I love to eat, right? And many, many of us do love to eat different foods, expose ourselves to different things, different kinds of music, cultural forms, dance, etc. We enjoy that, right? It's interesting, it's fascinating, we feel good about doing that. And then that doesn't require more than really fairly thin relationships, meaning not that they're trivial or not meaningful, but they're not necessarily layered, right? We're not talking about necessarily about complicated, about friendships, about people we really get to know and have deep relationships with. Then there is what I call thick relationships, which are again those more layered relationships. Diversity to me, maybe the most significant value of diversity for me is that it gives us opportunity to develop those thicker relationships, right? Those are the relationships I think we need if we are to really get to understand each other, to know our histories, to know each other's stories, which is in turn what's required if we're to, expand our understanding of who we are, right? When I think about who the we that I include myself in is, it can be smaller or larger. And I think it's that more robust, wider sense of we that's needed if we're really to be all that we can be, especially in a country, as we know, that has become more and more diverse. So when I think about then, so the question of what signs in children tell you that you need to do more work, it's really those things that show that, that aren't yet that the child isn't yet in alignment with that vision of what diversity is meant to serve, the purposes diversity is meant to serve. So it could be any number of things. I think about, children who only have friends who look like them, right? Or who think that they can only have friends who look like them. I think about children who, who think, we mentioned the store at the beginning, who see the Asian American man at the store and think that he looks exactly like the one Asian American in their church. You think about the Chicano young person who thinks that, she can't be Chicano because she doesn't speak Spanish. You think about and these are all real examples that have, that come to mind that I've been told about recently. You think about the child who thinks that a black girl at school can't be a princess because of the way, her hair looks. So, and I want to say, be very careful to say, if anything like this, right, is true of your child, if you've heard your child say things, Jen Harvey spoke to this earlier, this isn't a thing to freak out about, right? We teach our children to say please and thank you. If your 3 or 4-year-old isn't saying please and thank you consistently, that's not unusual. It just means we have more work to do.
That's a great way to think about it. So it's not a judgment on your parenting. It's, again, as Jennifer alluded to, it's more of a gift. It's an opportunity for you to lean in and challenge yourself and your family to have more of these thick relationships. Yeah. So what about, let's talk about schools, for example, or clubs or daycares that have theme days that showcase food and culture from various backgrounds. How do we distinguish between cultural appropriation and meaningful cross-cultural sharing? I wonder if you could help us kind of navigate that.
Another great question. So to me, the distinction, the key words in making that distinction are really care and consent, right? So, and I should say that this is, I think the issue of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation or cultural sharing, these are difficult. I think there's a lot of gray area here, and I've certainly found myself in circumstances when, where it wasn't clear to me, right, whether or not the line had been crossed. But broadly speaking, certainly, I think...
Andrew, you're telling me it's not clear to you. How are we regular folks out here supposed to navigate?
I know,
not easy.
Right? I know. It's not easy. The point is not to be perfect. And again, this came through both in what Caitlin had to say and in what Jen had to say. The point isn't to be perfect. I don't even know what perfection would look like. It's to know, is to learn and to do the best we can and to hold ourselves accountable for doing that. So... I think of a good friend of mine, white woman born in this country. Most of her family, her ancestors came from France, right? That's where she traces her roots to. She married a man, South Asian man, whose parents are Hindu, grew up in India, and when they got married, invited her into a ceremony that had deep roots in not only their religion, but the part of India that they came from. She was invited into that, right? That's the consent part. That is sharing, right? So it was, I believe, a 3-day ceremony, very ornate, right? All kinds of ritual. Apparently it was lovely. That's sharing. You can easily imagine that if she had, or someone else, if a couple got married who had no connections whatsoever, right, to the religion, to the region, to the tradition, to the culture, no understanding of the history, not only would they not have had consent to participate in such a ceremony, but we might also question the caring part, right? The understanding, the appreciation of the meaning that those rituals, those ceremonies, that dress has for the people who call it their culture. So that's the main distinction I would make.
That's a great way of putting it, consent and caring. So in thinking about this, is there a workload, let's call it, associated with doing the work to really embrace and celebrate diversity? As parents, how do we think about, what mindset do we need to start establishing these thick relationships? Is it just going to happen because we live in New York City and it's a very diverse neighborhood and, it'll just osmosis come through? Or is there more of a actual tangible workload and an effort involved?
Definitely it's work. It's definitely work. It's work even if you live in New York City and in a very diverse neighborhood. And of course, lots of people don't. In this country. This country has been and remains marked by segregation, not only in terms of where we live, but also in terms of our children and where they go to school in many, many cases, and perhaps most importantly, in terms of our social networks. So no, there are many neighborhoods, including diverse neighborhoods, where really that diversity stops at the front door, right? So who do we have over for dinner? Who's in our social circles? Who are our friends? And whom do our children see? Understand our friends to be, and what does that mean to say friends and social circles? It means who are the people that we love and admire and respect and care for and want to spend time with? Who is the we, right? That it perhaps extends beyond our family, and in turn, who loves us? Who cares for us? So no, it's work. I mean, the fact of segregation and separation in our country tells you that it's not easy to do. And as I said before, diversity, I think, certainly for me, is largely an opportunity, right, to do this work. It's sort of a gatekeeper. It's a necessary but not sufficient, right? Without diversity, it's very hard, or it's certainly much harder to make those connections across race, class, culture. With diversity, you still need to do work, of course, to develop those thick relationships.
To get there. So that's a great segue into one of the questions from our audience, because you mentioned, many parts of the country, diversity is not something that you see out your window, right? This question comes from someone who lives in a rural white farming area. They say, our interaction with non-white people is rare. How do I teach my 3.5-year-old that the people she hears and sees that aren't white are weird because they are not the same as her? So, how can they begin to address these issues where, most of the people they're interacting with are looking like them in a rural white farming area?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in this case, it's a rural white farming area, and there are many, many places, though, again, many contexts where people face sort of the same predicament of just not a lot of diversity there. So I think my general response would apply to many of those other situations as well. And really, the starting point for me would be to talk with your child about the value that you place on diversity. So even if there isn't a lot there, first we have to understand what do we mean by diversity and why is it so important to us, right? I'd actually have that conversation. There's some great recent research actually out of New York University, according to which children who thought that their parents wanted them to be friends with kids who didn't look like them were in fact more likely to pursue such friendships and less likely to be biased, right, against racial others. So just the signal that you send your child in saying this is important matters. Second, of course, as Jen was so good to underline, it's not enough simply to say, right? And both Jen and Caitlin talked about the importance of modeling. So the question would come up, I think, for your child, okay, if diversity is so important, why are we here? Why are we in a place that's more diverse? Talk about that, right? Talk about that. Talk about why the place isn't diverse. Talk about the choice you made, if indeed you made a choice to come there. And again, talk about how you feel about that. And then in terms of what you can actually do, again, in this internet age, in this age of social media, there are more and more possibilities, right? Certainly there are books, of course, and movies, pen pals. There's some very reputable pen pal organizations that make it possible for our children to connect and connect safely, which of course is important. Appreciate that, the choice is many, not all of us certainly, but have choices about where we live and where we send our children to school. So exercise those choices thoughtfully as possible. Again, it's not about being perfect. It is about doing the best you can.
Doing the best you can. I think that's so great. Thank you, Andrew Grant Thomas, for those strategies. I think the key takeaway there is that our children are watching, and we have to do our job as parents to be modeling that behavior.
Absolutely.
Keep an eye out for more great content on this topic, made possible by our partnership with Johnson's, Aveeno Baby, and Desitin.